Hello and welcome to this GSA Snapshot webinar on the global status of LTE and 5G fixed wireless access. The on-demand recording of this session will be shared with you immediately following the event. You can also download the presentation at any point by moving your mouse over the slides and clicking on the download icon on the top of the screen. There will be time for questions following the roughly 15-minute presentation, so please do submit any questions you have using the Q&A chat box on the right side of the screen as we go along. And the team will answer as many as we can, either live or after the event. The report that sits behind this data is published today, and a link to that free summary report will be shared with you immediately following this event. If you're a GSA associate or member, you can also download the full data set on the Global Service Provider Research in an Excel format. And again, that's available via the GSA website. But first, just a quick recap on GSA, organization established back in '98 to be the voice of the mobile ecosystem, and now numbering almost 100 members and associates. The work of the GSA includes both gathering and sharing data insights and industry advocacy. GSA has focused working groups, including Spectrum, private mobile networks, 6G standardization, and the Fixed Wireless Access Forum. The forum itself has 57 members of its own, representing about 80% of the infrastructure and chipset module and CPE value chain fixed wireless access, which gives you a sense of the breadth and depth of data that the GSA can draw upon. And we use that data to produce over 160 reports annually, all based on data from our Gambod databases. And these unique databases, which can be accessed by all employees of every GSA member and associate organization via the GSA website, contain the most up-to-date global data on 4G and 5G devices, networks, technologies, spectrum, and chipsets. GSA research tracks over 2,500 operators in the Gambod database, including data on over 620 public 5G networks being deployed, evaluated, tested, or trialed, planned, or even in the licensing stage. If your organization is a GSA member or associate, then you personally have unlimited access to all this data across all the databases, and you can use it to create slides and charts to support you in your daily work. But today we are focusing specifically on the global status of LTE and 5G fixed wireless access. And so to that end, I'll hand over to Ian Fogg and Vaishali Purit from the GSA research team to share the latest GSA data. Ian.
Great. Thank you very much, Richard. So let's take it away. Who's got the slide control? Next slide. So the presentation, the data in here is in a report that's published, I think, today. You'll get the link to the report after the webinar's over, anyone who's attended. All the data in this is also stored in the GSA's Gambod database, so you can pull the data out and play with it if you have access to that. And if you haven't got access to that, feel free to contact us and you can sign up as a member of the GSA, either a full member or an associate member. What we're going to look at today is the fixed wireless access market globally, looking at the availability of devices, networks, and technologies. This covers predominantly 4G and 5G technologies, although there are some interesting trends happening with RedCap, a flavor of 5G, reduced capability 5G that we've been tracking both in this piece of research, but also in the kind of companion RedCap report we published recently, which is also available on the GSA website, where you've seen a bunch of RedCap devices, the initial RedCap devices, are in the FWA category. Let me hand over to my colleague, who will then take you through the first part of the presentation.
Thank you, Ian. Before we dive right into the report, it would be good to provide some context of the status of fixed wireless on a global scale. For anyone unfamiliar, fixed wireless access can be used to deliver broadband to both residential and business premises, particularly in areas that are underserviced by more traditional broadband options or that have a greater rural population. Government initiatives to help connect the unconnected, the replacement of DSL, and the increased amount of work from home are significant trends accelerating its rollout. Fixed wireless is starting to be considered as a main broadband solution, as evidenced by the growth in both fixed wireless services and consumer premises equipment between November 2023 and November of this year. This data can be accessed from our Gambod database. During this period, the number of CPE devices have grown by a modest 2%, from 1,186 to 1,214, which could be due to a more resilient supply chain and new models of both 4G and 5G devices available in the market. Similarly, the number of fixed wireless services by operators has experienced a strong growth of 19%, from 587 to 699. This can be attributed to the fact that a growing number of operators are leveraging their 4G and 5G assets to offer this additional service to both consumers and businesses. As of November 2024, there are 564 unique operators investing in either LTE or 5G fixed wireless services across 188 countries and territories. Over 88% of these operators have launched a commercial service in 176 countries and territories. Interestingly, the majority of the LTE fixed services launched are in Europe, with 146 services, followed by the Middle East and Africa, with 144 services, and Asia Pacific, with 83 LTE fixed wireless services. This could be because these markets are highly concentrated. The top regions are the same for 5G fixed wireless services launched this year, but to a much lesser extent. Europe has 96 services launched, ahead of the Middle East and Africa, with 42 services, and Asia Pacific with 35 services. Let's now look at 5G fixed wireless. Overall, we can see that there are currently 618 operators investing in 5G networks globally, across 184 countries. Of these, 343 operators have launched or soft-launched one or more 5G services in 126 countries. Diving in further, we can see that 210 of these operators have also invested in 5G fixed wireless services, and 162 of these operators have launched 3GPP compliant 5G fixed wireless services, an increase of just 6% from June of this year. Overall, 5G fixed wireless access accounts for just under half of all 5G launch services, implying that it is a continued driver of 5G network investment and monetization. Comparing the number of operators allows us to see how it differs, not only by technology, but also by region. Although the Middle East and Africa account for the majority of LTE fixed wireless operators, with 149 providers, Europe follows closely behind, with 146 operators. Trailing behind is Asia Pacific with 75 operators, North America with 59, and Latin America with 57. Conversely, Europe leads in 5G fixed service operators, totaling 96 providers. The Middle East and Africa are second, with 46 operators, preceded by Asia Pacific, with 32 operators, Latin America with 20, and North America with just 17 5G fixed wireless operators. This difference could be explained by the different adoption curves of 5G networks, particularly for the Middle East and Africa, which are still building out their 5G networks in many countries. This year, 223 operators were discovered using volume-based tariffs for their LTE fixed wireless service, compared to just 43 of operators for their 5G fixed wireless services, thus showcasing their popularity. In comparison to this time last year, the number of operators using a volume tariff model for 5G grew by 13%, whilst the number of operators using the same model for LTE fell by 2%. Speed-based tariffs are growing, as evidenced by the growth in the number of operators. Those using a speed-based tariff for LTE fixed services grew by 12% from last year, now standing at 93 operators. The number of operators using a speed-based model for their 5G fixed wireless access services also grew 16% from November last year to 36 operators this year. From the data collected on the fastest download speeds quoted by operators for fixed wireless services, it is evident that 5G fixed wireless is able to access greater speeds in comparison to LTE fixed wireless. As of this year, the maximum speed promoted for 5G services ranged from 20 megabits per second to 5.4 gigabits per second, whereas the maximum speed for LTE services ranged from 1 megabit per second to 2.5 gigabits per second. Clearly, these faster 5G speeds are driving adoption compared to LTE and are comparable to many fixed broadband and even fibre options out in the market today. I will now hand over to my colleague Ian, who will talk about consumer premises equipment and 5G RedCap.
Thanks, that's great. So as you heard just now, there is a change in the type of tariffs coming through. If you look at the total number of 5G fixed wireless offerings, you can see a greater proportion of those are on the speed-based tariffs. So it's not that there's more growth there, but it's also more common on the 5G technologies, which is interesting. And that mirrors some of the things we've seen among smartphone tariffs in the market too, where speed-based tariffing is becoming more common. Looking at the CPE side, this is the type of CPE offered by operators. You could see of 609 networks, there are 444 that are LTE, 165 that are 5G. You can see the vast majority of CPE devices are indoor only. And that, of course, means that if it's a self-install offering, which it probably is with indoor, there's a decision point for the user about where in the house, where in the home they place that CPE, or certainly in a small business. It probably needs to be near a window, near where the cell signal is very strong. You can see outdoor is much less common for CPE, and that's because it typically will require some kind of truck roll. It's more expensive, it's more problematic. The advantage, of course, is you get much better signal. We've seen outdoor perhaps most common in places like North America, where they've had millimeter wave, where you've needed to have that outdoor signal because millimeter wave doesn't penetrate as well indoors. But generally, it's much more of a indoor CPE offering. The other challenge you have with indoor CPE is that device probably has a Wi-Fi capability and a cellular capability, and there's a trade-off for the user in where they put them in the building about where is the best place in the building for the best Wi-Fi signal, which may be a different place to where the best place is for the cellular signal. The cellular signal might be near a window, on the edge of the building, on the edge of the premise. The Wi-Fi would ideally be in the middle. So there's an interesting dynamic there around that indoor market. You can see that the dynamic in terms of the growth here is we're seeing the proportion of operators offering both indoor and outdoor CPE for LTE has grown by a very small amount, by 1.4% since November 2023. It's a greater amount for 5G to 19%. I think one of the interesting things about that is that for a 5G signal, even if it's sub 6 gigahertz, you typically want people to be able to access the capacity bands, 3.5 gigahertz type bands, which, although they penetrate in building considerably better than millimeter wave, they still penetrate less well than lower frequency bands. So that's what's probably driving that greater number there into that growth on 5G. Next slide, please. We count and we track the number of FWA devices here. You can see that while there is enormous growth ongoing in the number of 5G smartphones that are being announced, it's been a much flatter growth curve for FWA devices. Typically, FWA devices don't get replaced as often. They typically don't have quite the same high-end chipsets. All of this is tracked in our Gambod database, and you can have a look at that and see exactly what's happening. But you can see there is some growth, but it's much more modest. The number of indoor-only devices has grown by 4.3% since November 2023, and outdoor-only by 2.4%. So very small growth, but there's still massive growth in the number of smartphones. That also just reflects the diversity of the smartphone market, the sheer number of vendors in that market, which is much greater than there is for FWA. If you look at the number of vendors, you can see that on the count there too. We're up to 85 FWA vendors, up from 83 the last time we updated this in May 2024. Next slide, please. So I mentioned RedCap at the start. So RedCap is starting to arrive. We have that separate report on RedCap. The reason it's slow is that an operator has to have a 5G standalone network deployed and needs to be up to release 17 before they can offer RedCap. And standalone has been a relatively slow thing to happen because of the need to both upgrade the core network to a 5G core from an EPC, from a 4G core that would have been used for non-standalone, which obviously is a very complex, big piece of work for the operator. But you've also needed to have devices and chipsets that have good quality standalone support. And that's something that's taken a while to arrive, but it is now with us. The other piece is that operators have really been looking to do slicing, 5G Advanced type things, and it's only really now that we're seeing those capabilities mature enough for operators to kind of push ahead with standalone. RedCap is fascinating. I think it's thought, to people who haven't looked at it, is largely a kind of Internet of Things type technology about getting lower capability, lower priced devices and modules and things out into a range of industrial markets. It's really interesting to see it arrive and become important in fixed wireless access. And the goal with where we are with RedCap is really to get a 5G technology device for a similar price point to a 4G device. Now, why is that interesting? There's two things. Firstly, if you have a 5G CP device out there, you've got more longevity with it. 5G will be around in market for longer than 4G. The second piece is that although it's lower capability compared to a regular 5G chipset and device, you can still tap into those 5G capacity bands that aren't available for LTE. So you can more cost effectively serve the FWA customer with a RedCap device if you can tap into those 3 to 6 gigahertz bands than you can with a 4G device. And then you've also got the capability to put the users onto a separate network slice and manage that separately, because RedCap also automatically means you've got a standalone capability available as well. So there's a whole range of reasons that we're seeing it arrive. It's still fairly small scale, but it's something we're tracking, and you can see that in the database. When you look at the survey we've done, and this is part of the research we did for this report, but also for the work that the FWA Special Interest Group, the GSA runs, which is a group of companies looking to understand and drive forward adoption of fixed wireless access. Again, that's something that if you're interested in learning more about, get in touch and we can get you involved with that group. So we did a survey here as part of that, and you can see that the majority of companies we surveyed were planning to introduce RedCap capable FWA products this year. And of course, I think if we do this again next year, we'll be seeing bigger uptake in that. Next slide, please. In terms of where we are with RedCap globally, as I mentioned, it's still fairly early days because of that reliance on both Release 17 and standalone. But you can see there's traction in North America, in Europe, in the Middle East, across APAC with RedCap already. I think if we do this in a few months' time, we'll see this will be even greater interest and adoption in it. We've tracked 4 operators have launched 5G RedCap services, STC in Kuwait, plus the 3 Chinese operators. There are a lot of trials happening though, which, there's always a judgment call about when a trial becomes a full commercial launch or not. But there's a lot of activity happening around this. Next slide, please. I mentioned the work the GSA does on FWA. So we have 57 member companies now on the FWA forum. If you'd like to get involved in this, please do get in touch with us. That means you can help drive some of the research forward, put interest in, put questions. Rather than just ask us questions after the research is published, you can drive forward some of the research we're doing in terms of how we categorize things in the market, the surveys we do of companies in the market. You can help shape the research going forward and drive the FWA market essentially. So contact us after this, and we can help with that too. Next slide, please. So I think where we're heading now is Q&A. I think we've had some questions have come in during the while we've been speaking, but if you've got more questions, just add them into the Q&A bit box in the website in the chat. Let's have a look here. So what do we got in terms of questions? More questions appearing. My chat window's scrolling as I speak. So here we are. How common is it for FWA end users to place their indoor CP somewhere other than the buy window that would incur higher attenuation signal loss? I think it all depends. What we've started to see happen is some of the operators started to do like a mesh solution. So you can have like an FWA CP by the window where it gets the best cellular signal. Then there's a second Wi-Fi device you can put more centrally in the home. We've seen that start to arrive. So that then kind of mitigates that problem. But I think a lot depends on the type of building and the type of signal. I don't think we've done any direct user research on that, but that would be a great thing to have a look at. Other questions we've got on here. Where are we looking down the list? So we've got a question here. We hear from operators, a couple mentioned Orange and A1, they don't want to use FWA over red cap due to the bad spectral efficiency of only 2.3. I think that's wrong, that unit. Because of the number of antennas essentially compared to the antennas and the capability of a regular device. I think that a lot depends on the market, right? I mean, if you have a good enough ARPU that means you can justify having a higher cost CP, then you're going to go and do that probably. I think where RedCap comes in is not replacing higher quality 5G CPE. It's more about replacing and accelerating the transition of 4G CPE is how to think about it. So again, it depends on the market. If you've got a lot of 4G CPE out there, you're trying to get people off it, this might be a way of doing that. Plus, there are regions in the world where cost and ARPU levels are significantly lower than they are in the markets that were mentioned there, which I think was Austria and probably France, I'm guessing, from the operators mentioned. So those are globally relatively high ARPU markets. There are lots of markets where FWA is happening where there isn't the same ARPU level to justify the higher cost CPE device. I mean, the other piece as well when you have RedCap is because you've got a lower cost cellular, you'll probably pair it with lower cost Wi-Fi as well. You'll probably put Wi-Fi 6 with it. Where if you have a full fat 5G CPE, you'll probably want to think about Wi-Fi 7. You might have, and then you start thinking about how many Wi-Fi radios do you put in. So you might end up with not just a higher cost device because of the cellular component, the cellular chipset in the CPE, but also the Wi-Fi component that you need to match with it to make sure that a user connecting over the Wi-Fi can actually benefit from the higher quality 5G chipset you have in the device. So there's a twin cost implication from having 5G, from both the 5G chipset and antennas, but also the associated the associated Wi-Fi antennas and chipset that you need. Other questions we have in here. Have you seen, this is a good question, have you seen operators trying to monetize quality service beyond maximum speed, e.g. using priority or guarantee? Yes, there are examples of that. I mean, there are examples of operators putting FWA on a separate slice. Arguably, that's more for a cost-saving dynamic, but there are operators certainly looking to monetize not just FWA, but their overall offering using different priorities of service. I know, for example, Do in UAE is looking at doing that as part of its overall 5G proposition, not just for FWA, but also smartphone users. I know, for example, AIS, I think in Thailand, is doing kind of like that kind of quality of service boost type model. So there are examples of that. I think it's still an emerging area. And again, we're seeing the usual thing that we saw back in the day, long-standing thing around people talking about gamers in the consumer market. But I think a lot of that at the moment is more about cost management rather than trying to add higher price tariffs on. There's a question about how do we understand red cap service in the Middle East, how we get more insights. Well, best answer is get access to the Gambol database, and you can then have a look and see what data's in there around red cap, and have a look at the red cap report that's freely available on the website. So the Gambol database is for GSA members. If you're not a member, want to get involved with that, which you can actually slice the data, do get in touch. Compared to many membership organizations, this is a very affordable subscription. But the Red Cat report is also freely available on the GSA website to non-members too. You just don't get all the data to slice and dice. What did I miss here, guys? Have I missed any questions to chat? Looking for other questions.
I found a question.
Okay, go on, shoot.
What are the main drivers for fixed wireless access growth in emerging markets? So the primary drivers are mainly affordability and ease of deployment. Fixed wireless allows for quicker broadband deployment in areas with limited fixed line infrastructure. And so what this does is it makes it a cost-effective solution to increase connectivity for both residential and business users. In emerging markets as well, affordability is a big thing. So fixed wireless can often access, can be available to those areas where fixed line or normal broadband options aren't typically available.
Yeah, that's all true, obviously, and then you've also got some operators that are fixed wireless access only. So there's, for example, there's Rain in South Africa, for example, which is a fixed wireless access only play. So you get some which are operators that have a mobile smartphone service, and then they're doing this as well because it's a way of reaching people in a much more cost-effective way than running new fixed infrastructure. I had a fascinating conversation a couple of weeks ago about the problems of fixed infrastructure in Africa, and I was sitting at dinner, and someone was telling me, the problem isn't that just there isn't fixed infrastructure there; it's that when you put fibre in, which you could do relatively cheaply because labour is fairly cheap, the issue is that you put it down a road or something, and the locals often just building things, they're digging things, and they're not used to things being underground in ducts or cabling, and they just dig up and break things, and that you get fibre breaks happening much more frequently than you would in a developed market, where people are much more used to things being underground, and maybe there's a map or information somewhere about exactly what's underground. So there's a massive issue where even if you put fibre in, you're at risk of getting much more service interruptions, where if you do it wirelessly, you just sidestep the whole problem, which, not something I'd been tightly aware of. But I thought that was fascinating too. What other question you got here? The Q&A is quite dynamic. I think we've done all, haven't we? The question about how much can FWA compete with fibre speeds? So I think this is a really interesting question. So it's not really about the competition on speed, it's the competition on capacity. So with 5G, you can offer speeds that you market at a very similar speed level to a fibre speed. You can market FWA services with hundreds of megabits very easily if you want to. You could probably even market them close to a gigabit if you didn't have many users. The challenge is the capacity of the network is much lower than a typical fibre network. So the reality is, although you technically could market at similar speeds, the reality is you don't generally market FWA speeds as fast because you need to allow for contention. You need to allow for shared usage. and the capacity of a fixed wireless access network tends to be considerably lower than a fiber network, even if it's a GPON network where you've got multiple splits in the fiber and you've got some shared contention. You've still typically got a lot more capacity there than you have on a FWA offering. And then you have the other dynamic, which is if you're in a rural area, just because you're doing fixed wireless access doesn't necessarily mean you've got fiber on each of the masts. You may well have microwave links there, which means they become a bottleneck and limit the overall capacity. So typically it's not the speeds per se, it's the capacity of the network, which is lower, which is why you look at both data volume or speed tiering. The rationale of doing speed tiering is that it's easier for a customer to understand, and therefore it matches more closely the way a fiber or cable service or DSL service might be marketed. So it's easier to be comparison. But the reason you do the speed limit is that if you have a lower speed, typically that means they can't use as much data. So you still get the capacity benefit from it if you speed tier. It's a question about operators geo-locking FWA devices to keep them as a fixed service. So I think the idea there would be that you'd market your service based on where the FWA has been sold into. So if you've got a hot area of network, I haven't seen that so much on the FWA side. I have seen that on the satellite NTN side when you're using those sort of devices, because of course satellite has got even more capacity constraints than FWA, and we've seen some of the LEO providers either geo-block or geo-block and then charge a higher price if you want mobility with your satellite service. I've not seen that so much on the FWA side as far as locking the devices. I have seen operators routinely, when you are looking to buy the service, give you a different offering based on where you physically are, and sometimes choose not to offer you things because of where you are. I don't know, have you seen anything on geo-blocking on this, Vishali?
Geo-blocking is new to me, but I think we're coming to the end. So there's just one more slide.
Yeah, so I think to geo-block it well with an FWA CPE, you could do it based on the base station on the radio. I guess if you have a very high-end FWA CPE, you could do it based on the GPS, but most of the FWA don't have GPSs built in. So I don't know, it's an interesting one. I think that's one we maybe have a think about and come back to you on. There may be information in the database around what capabilities CPE has, but it's a great one, and maybe we should add that to the survey next year, next to the FWA survey, and ask people about that.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that also ends up with loads of questions coming in. It was sort of rapid fire by the end of it. So thank you very much. And well done, Ian, for reading and processing your thoughts at the same time.
Hey, it's a really hot topic. I mean, it's super dynamic in North America, but there's all kind of interesting dynamics in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Europe. It's a really interesting space. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, worries, absolutely. And in terms of some of the fixed wireless access resources that we've got available on the website, links to some of them, some here. Again, if you look on the landing page of the fixed wireless access forum, you'll see all of these in one place. The address for that is on your screen there. You will receive a link to the webinar recording and to the report that lies behind this data immediately after the event. We've got 2 more events coming up for the end of the year. We've got the Fixed Wireless Access Forum plenary, where again we'll share some of the data, but also be joined by operators and vendors sharing best practices. So we'll have ditto from the Philippines joining us to share their experience of fixed wireless access, and vendors as well, sort of sharing their perspectives on how to best take advantage of the opportunity. And first we'll have the traditional end of year recap on all things 5G in the year that's gone by. So Ian will be giving his highlights reel of 5G from 2024, looking at everything from 5G NTN, private networks, 5G standalone, sunsetting, everything you can possibly imagine, bringing together all the data we've shared this year to give you a sort of one-stop shop on all the key milestones from the year. Again, as the team has intimated, if you want the detailed data that lies behind this, that's all in the Gambod databases. And if you'd like access to that, then please get in touch. If your organization is a member or associate, then you just have to use your work email address and you get access through the websites to all of these databases. To be kept up to date with all the latest research, and again, follow us on social, sign up to the email newsletter, and we will share the reports as they are published. So finally, on behalf of the GSA team, again, I'll just thank Ian and Vaishali again, and thank you for joining us, and we'll hope to see you at one of the events in the near future. Thank you.
Great, thanks.